My cruel parents invited me to my sister's extravagant wedding for one reason only, to shame me in front of their wealthy new investors. They wanted the room to see me as the broken, disappointing daughter, but they never expected that a single text from my phone would uncover the truth they had buried for years and bring their false empire crashing down in moments. My father raised his glass and called me the family's disappointment. 200 guests clapped. My mother smiled like she'd rehearsed it in a mirror. I smiled back, because they had no idea what was in my pocket. The invitation had come 3 weeks earlier. Thick cream paper, gold letters, a private estate in Newport, Rhode Island, black tie, no +1. At the bottom, in my mother's neat handwriting, "Try not to embarrass us, Claire." I laughed out loud reading that. Then I called a woman named Denise Marsh and told her I was in. For 5 years, my parents had told everyone I was broken, bitter, jealous of my perfect older sister, Vanessa, a daughter who couldn't hold a job or hold her tongue. The truth was simpler and worse. I knew exactly what my father's investment firm was. A machine built on forged audits and stolen retirement money. My mother ran the charity foundation that laundered it clean. Vanessa just looked away, because looking away paid for her diamonds. By the time I walked into that glass tent by the ocean, I already knew how the night would end. I just didn't know yet how much it would cost me to get there, or how long the road behind me had actually been. 3 years earlier, I was 26, and proud of myself in a way I can't fully explain anymore. I'd landed a compliance analyst job at Vail Harbor Capital, my father's firm, on my own merit. Top of my class at Fordham, 2 years at a mid-size broker-dealer first. No favors called in. I wanted to prove I hadn't gotten there because of the last name stitched into the lobby's brass letters. Richard Vail, my father, had built Vail Harbor into a $340 million wealth management shop over 18 years. Silver hair, tailored suits, a handshake that made strangers trust him before he said a word. My mother, Elaine, sat on the boards of 3 charities and hosted a gala every spring that raised millions for underprivileged families. According to the program, nobody ever read past the cover. I believed in the firm. I believed in them. That's the part people never understand when I tell this story. I wasn't looking for cracks. I was looking for a career. The chief compliance officer was a man named Frank Doyle, 58, 22 years at the firm, the kind of guy who kept a photo of his grandkids on his desk and called everyone champ. He trained me on reconciliations, custodial statements, Form ADV filings. He was patient. I liked him. The first red flag was small enough to miss. A wire transfer to an entity called Meridian Holdings LLC, routed through a custodial account that didn't match any client on our roster. I asked Frank about it in the break room. Casual, over bad coffee. Probably a fee-sharing arrangement with a sub-advisor, he said. I'll check. He never got back to me. I told myself it was nothing. Everyone's busy in Q4. The second time, I couldn't tell myself it was nothing. I was reconciling client statements against the custodian's records, a task so boring it had put me to sleep at my desk more than once, when I found a $2. 1 million discrepancy in an account belonging to a retired dentist named Harold Pruitt. His statement showed steady 11% annual returns, quarter after quarter, like clockwork. The custodian's actual records showed the money had been moved into Meridian Holdings 8 months earlier and never came back. My hands went cold before my brain caught up. I pulled 3 more accounts. Same pattern, different amounts, all routed through Meridian. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Complex funds structure things in ways junior analysts don't understand. I wasn't senior. I wasn't a partner. Who was I to see fraud in 8 months at the job? So I brought it to Frank again, this time with printouts. He looked at the papers for a long moment. Then he looked at me, and something in his face changed. Not anger, something closer to pity. "Claire," he said, "let it go. Talk to your father if you're worried, not me." I did talk to my father. That was my first real mistake. Richard Vail did not yell. He never yelled. He poured 2 glasses of scotch in his office, handed me one I didn't want, and told me Meridian Holdings was a private equity vehicle for accredited investors. Completely legal, completely separate books. Nothing for me to worry my head over. "You're smart, Claire," he said. "Smarter than Vanessa, if I'm honest. But smart people still need to know which doors are theirs to open." 3 weeks later, I was moved off client reconciliations and onto marketing compliance, reviewing brochures for regulatory language, a demotion dressed up as a lateral move. Around the same time, at Vanessa's engagement party at the yacht club, I overheard my father tell a guest that Vail Harbor was launching an exclusive new vehicle, invitation only, and I watched Harold Pruitt's name come up on a printed list of priority allocations sitting on the caterer's table where nobody thought to hide it. I told myself it was a coincidence that his account had already lost money he didn't know was gone. My stomach told me otherwise. 6 months after the demotion, I was let go in what HR called a restructuring of the compliance function. They offered me 4-month severance and a non-disparagement agreement. My mother called that same week, not to check on me, but to remind me not to cause a scene at Vanessa's bridal shower the following Saturday. Before I signed anything, my father called me into his office one last time. He didn't offer scotch this time. "You've always thought you were the smart one," he said, quiet, almost gentle, which was somehow worse than yelling. "Understand something, Claire. If you ever say a word about Meridian to anyone, it won't just be my name in the papers. You signed off on 3 of those reconciliations before I moved you. Your signature is on file too. Think very carefully about who has more to lose." I signed the severance agreement 4 days later, but the night before I signed it, I made copies of everything on my work laptop onto a personal drive. The Pruitt account discrepancy, 6 other flagged accounts, 2 internal emails from Frank Doyle that used the phrase, "keep this between us." I didn't know yet what I'd do with it. I just knew I wasn't going to let it disappear along with my badge, and I wasn't going to let my father's threat be the last word on the subject. For almost 2 years after that, I didn't do anything with the files. I told myself I'd moved on. I got a new compliance job at a smaller firm in Boston. I went to therapy, technically, 4 sessions with a counselor named Dr. Angela Foster, before I stopped going, because talking about my family made my chest feel like it was being sat on. Then, on a Tuesday in March, I got a message on LinkedIn from a name I hadn't seen in 2 years. Teresa Malik, my father's former executive assistant. "Can we talk? Off the record. It's about Vail Harbor." We met at a diner in Providence, not Newport, because Teresa said Newport had too many familiar faces. She was 51, tired around the eyes, and she ordered coffee she didn't touch. "I stayed quiet for 12 years. She told me. "I shredded things I shouldn't have. I typed emails I knew were lies. I told myself it wasn't my job to ask questions." She looked at her hands, at the thin white line where a wedding ring used to sit. Then last month, a woman called our office in tears. Her husband died, and Vail Harbor had delayed processing her death benefit distribution for 4 months. I found out later there was nothing left to distribute. It had already moved through Meridian 11 months before he even passed. She slid a manila folder across the table. Internal memos, a spreadsheet tracking 23 restricted transfer accounts. My father's handwriting on a printed email, a note scrawled in the margin. "Claire is useful because people already think she's emotional. Let her think she imagined it." I read that line 4 times. My hands were shaking so badly I had to put the paper down. "There's a reporter," Teresa added quietly. "Elena Cho. She called our office 8 months ago asking about Meridian. Frank told her it was a dead end. I don't think it was." That was the moment I stopped rationalizing anything. I didn't go to a lawyer first. I went to the SEC's website and filled out a Form TCR, tip, complaint, or referral, at 1:40 a.m., typing with 3 fingers because I couldn't stop shaking enough to use all 10. I attached everything. My old files, Teresa's folder, the Pruitt account numbers, dates, dollar amounts, the email with my father's handwriting in the margin. The first response wasn't encouraging. 3 days later, a case intake screener named Dale Corbett called to walk me through next steps, which turned out to mean almost nothing. "I'll be straight with you," he said, not unkindly. "Tips involving family-run firms rarely go anywhere. These people have lawyers who've spent years learning how to bury a paper trail deeper than a junior analyst can dig it up. Don't get your hopes up." He told me the file would sit in a general queue, and it might be months before anyone with real authority even opened it. I hung up and told myself that was the end of it. I'd done my part. Nobody was coming. I was wrong. Buried in that general queue was a flag Dale hadn't noticed. The dollar amounts in my file matched a pattern already sitting on Denise Marsh's desk from an unrelated complaint filed by a New Jersey pension fund 2 months earlier. 2 threads nobody had connected yet. Until my file gave a name to the shell company, both cases kept circling. 6 days later, I got a call from a woman who introduced herself as Denise Marsh, senior investigator with the SEC's Division of Enforcement, Asset Management Unit. 12 years on the job, she told me later. The kind of voice that sounded like she'd heard every excuse a fraudster could invent, and had stopped being surprised by any of them. "This is a lot of documentation for a former junior compliance analyst to have kept," she said on our first call. "It wasn't an accusation. It was respect. I kept copies before I signed my severance," I told her. "I didn't know what I'd do with them. I just didn't want to be the only person who remembered." Denise connected me with a securities whistleblower attorney named Patricia Nguyen, 15 years litigating SEC whistleblower claims. Sharp, unhurried, the kind of lawyer who read every document twice before she said a word about it. In our first meeting, she also told me something Denise hadn't mentioned. My father's threat about my signature could cut both ways. "He's right that your name is on 3 of those reconciliations," Patricia said. "But the SEC's whistleblower program has provisions for cooperating parties who weren't the architects of the fraud. You flagged the discrepancy in writing before you were moved off the account. That email to Frank Doyle is the single most valuable document in this entire case because it proves you tried to stop this before you ever thought about exposing it. Under Dodd-Frank," she continued, sliding a folder of statutes across her desk like she was handing me armor, "you're protected from retaliation. And if this results in sanctions over..." "Under Dodd-Frank," she continued, sliding a folder of statutes across her desk like she was handing me armor. You're protected from retaliation. And if this results in sanctions over $1 million, you may be entitled to an award between 10 and 30% of what's recovered. But Claire, I need you to understand something. This will take time. These cases move in years, not weeks. I didn't want years, but I didn't have a choice. For the next 14 months, the investigation crawled the way institutions always do. Slowly, then all at once, then slowly again. Subpoenas went out to Vail Harbor's custodian bank. A forensic accountant named Tom Reyes, a CPA the SEC contracted to trace the shell company structure, spent months mapping Meridian Holdings back through 4 other entities: Ashcroft Ventures, Blue Compass Partners, Northgate Advisory Trust, each one a shell wrapped around the last, like nesting dolls built to survive an audit. Your father didn't just steal money, Tom told me on a call, sounding almost impressed in a grim way. He built an architecture. Whoever designed this understood exactly how forensic accountants trace fraud and built dead ends on purpose. It took us 4 months just to prove Ashcroft and Meridian shared a beneficial owner. I sat in on 2 evidence review sessions at Patricia's office, watching Tom lay out exhibits across a conference table like a man dealing cards, bank statements labeled Exhibit A through Exhibit M, wire confirmations, the printed email now formally logged as Exhibit D. Patricia explained chain of custody to me in painful detail. Every document had to be traceable back to its original source, untampered, time-stamped, or a defense attorney could get it thrown out in a heartbeat. This isn't about being right, Claire, she told me. It's about being unimpeachable. Meanwhile, my family had no idea any of this was happening. I still went to Sunday calls. I still sent a birthday card to my mother. I sat through Vanessa's engagement announcement to a man named Andrew Pierce, heir to a hotel fortune, and clapped along with everyone else at the country club, my stomach in knots the entire time. It cost me something I still can't fully name, sitting across from my father at those family dinners, watching him refill his wine glass and talk about protecting what we've built, knowing there was a federal investigator building a case against him a floor below his own conscience. Then, in April, the FBI got involved. Wire fraud crosses a line the SEC alone can't fully prosecute. That's a criminal matter, not just civil. I was introduced to Special Agent Carlos Mendez of the FBI's White Collar Crimes Division, 15 years of experience, a soft-spoken man who asked more questions in silence than most people ask out loud. Once this becomes public, Agent Mendez told me during our first meeting in a nondescript federal building conference room, your father will try to move whatever isn't already frozen. People like him always do. Offshore accounts, art, jewelry, anything liquid. We need the timing to be right. I asked him what right meant. It means we move before he does, he said, not after. He also told me something that kept me up more nights than I expected. Subpoenas had already gone out for Vanessa's financial records, given the wedding gifts and the size of certain loans my father had made to cover parts of the ceremony. She wasn't a target, but she wasn't clean either. Around the same time, Elena Cho found me. Not through the SEC. Reporters aren't supposed to know who's cooperating, and Patricia made sure my name never touched a public filing before it had to, but through an old Fordham classmate who'd mentioned once in passing that Richard Vail's younger daughter had left the firm under weird circumstances. Elena was thorough that way. She'd been covering financial fraud for almost a decade, and she called me on a Sunday evening, polite and direct. I'm not asking you to confirm or deny anything, she said. I'm telling you that I already have 3 former Vail Harbor employees willing to talk, and a paper trail that leads back to accounts your father controls personally. When this breaks, it's going to break with or without you. I'd rather it break accurately. I told her I couldn't talk. She said she understood, and that the door would stay open. I hung up shaking, not because she'd threatened me, but because she hadn't needed to. The walls were closing in on their own now, and I wasn't the only person closing them. I called Patricia in a panic that night, certain I'd somehow blown 14 months of careful work with one 3-minute phone call I hadn't even wanted to take. She was quiet for a moment, then told me something I still think about. Claire, you didn't create this problem for your father. Elena Cho is doing her job the same way you did yours. The only difference is you found the truth first and had the courage to make it count for something instead of just a headline. The timing broke on a Wednesday, 2 days before Vanessa's wedding. Patricia called me at 9 p.m., her voice tighter than I'd ever heard it. Claire, we have a problem. Someone tipped your father off that a former employee has been cooperating with regulators. He doesn't know it's you specifically, yet, but he's spooked. Tom traced a wire this morning. $12 million moved out of a Vail Harbor operating account into a private bank in the Caymans. If he does that with the rest before we get an emergency asset freeze motion filed, there may be nothing left to recover for the Pruitts of the world. Nothing left for anyone. How long do we have? Denise thinks 48 hours, maybe less. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets for a long time after that call, knees pulled to my chest, phone face down on the tile because I couldn't stand to look at it. It buzzed anyway. My mother, texting to remind me about the dress code. Something appropriate this time, Claire. We have important guests. 20 minutes later, she called directly. I almost didn't answer. Your father mentioned someone's been asking questions about old accounts. she said, too casually, testing the water. If anyone contacts you, reporters, anyone strange, you'll tell us first, won't you? After everything he's done for you? Everything he's done for me, I repeated. Don't start, Claire. Not 2 days before your sister's wedding. If this family goes down, you go down with it. Your name is on those files too. Remember that. She hung up before I could answer. I sat there with the dial tone in my ear, and for the first time in the entire 14 months, I understood exactly how much they were counting on my fear to keep me quiet a little longer. Before I could think better of it, I did something Patricia had explicitly told me not to do. I called Harold Pruitt. I'd never spoken to him. I only knew his name from a spreadsheet. But something about my mother's voice made me want to warn somebody, anybody, that the ground was about to move. Mr. Pruitt, my name is Claire Vale, I said, my voice cracking on my own last name. I used to work at Vale Harbor Capital. I think you should talk to a lawyer about your account. Soon. There was a long silence, then a tired, irritated laugh. Vale, huh? Your father's people already called me twice this year telling me everything's fine. Now his daughter's calling to tell me it isn't? I've had enough calls for one lifetime, young lady. He hung up before I could say anything else. I sat with the phone still against my ear, listening to nothing, and understood for the first time that I couldn't fix this one call at a time. Whatever happened next would have to be big enough that nobody could hang up on it. I laughed. And then I think I cried, and I'm still not sure which one came first. The next morning, I called Denise Marsh myself. I want to know something, I said. If 200 wealthy investors found out what my father did to their money in the middle of a room he couldn't leave, a room full of witnesses, full of people who could pull their funds before he could move another dollar, would that help you? There was a long pause on the line. Legally, Denise said carefully, we can't have you announce active details of a pending federal investigation. That could compromise the case. But there's nothing stopping you, as a private citizen, from sharing documents that are already part of the public SEC filing record. The cease and desist order we're filing tomorrow morning becomes public the moment it's filed. If your timing lines up with our filing and you only share what's public, then it's not interference, I said. It's just very good timing. Very good timing, she agreed. I didn't say that, but yes. Patricia got on a follow-up call 20 minutes later and made me repeat back, word for word, exactly what I could and couldn't say, what I could and couldn't send, and had me sign off on a document confirming I understood the boundaries. She wasn't going to let me build a case for 14 months and then torch it with one reckless move. I had less than 36 hours to get it right, a black dress that still had the tags on, and a mother's threat still ringing in my ears. The wedding sat under a glass tent by the ocean. Chandeliers hung above white roses. A string quartet played near an ice sculpture shaped like 2 swans, already sweating in the July heat. My mother spotted me first. She pulled me into a stiff hug that smelled like her expensive perfume and older resentment. Claire, she said, loud enough for the row of guests behind her. You actually came. Heads turned. Right on cue. My father walked over with 3 men in navy suits. Investors. I recognized one instantly. Martin Ellis, a real estate developer who'd wired $40 million into Vale Harbor's newest fund 6 weeks earlier, according to the filings Tom Reyes had shown me. This is our younger daughter, my father said smoothly. She used to work in compliance before her difficulties. The men gave polite, uncomfortable smiles. Vanessa floated over next in lace that cost more than my rent, looked me up and down and said, "Oh, Claire, you wore that? Brave." My mother laughed softly like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all week. I said nothing. I didn't need to win that round. I already knew who was winning the night. Champagne got poured. My father tapped his glass and stood. Family isn't simple, he said, voice booming across the tent. Some children test you. Some disappoint you. Applause. Vanessa dabbed at fake tears. Then his eyes landed on me. And to those who tried to destroy this family, he said, raising his glass higher, may tonight prove the truth always wins. The tent went quiet. My mother smiled her rehearsed smile. My phone buzzed once in my clutch. A text from Patricia. Filed. It's public. Now. I pulled out my phone. I typed 2 words. Send it. Across the tent, Martin Ellis's phone buzzed in his pocket. Then another investor's. Then another. Within seconds, 30 screens were glowing at once, lighting up faces that had been smiling a moment before. A waiter dropped a tray of glasses. Nobody moved to clean it up. Is this real? Someone whispered. Martin Ellis stood so fast his chair fell backward. His face had gone the color of the tablecloth. On every phone sat the same link. The SEC's newly filed cease and desist order and emergency asset freeze motion against Vale Harbor Capital and Richard Vale, filed that morning, now fully public record. Bank transfers, shell company structures, fake client statements, a quote from the order itself, cold and clinical. Respondent is alleged to have misappropriated investor funds through a network of affiliated shell entities in violation of Section 10B of the Securities Exchange Act. My father turned toward me. 200 guests watched him do it. For the first time in my life, my father looked scared of me instead of the other way around. Claire, he said quietly, what did you do? I didn't do anything tonight, I said. The SEC filed a public document this morning. I just have good timing. Vanessa stood frozen in her wedding dress, veil still pinned, staring at a phone one of the groomsmen had shoved toward her. Andrew Pierce read over her shoulder, and I watched his face do something I recognized. The exact, slow collapse of trust I'd felt reading that margin note in Teresa's folder months earlier. He didn't say a word to my sister. He just handed the phone back, turned, and walked out of the tent alone, past the swan sculpture, out into the dark toward the parking lot. Vanessa didn't come after him. She turned to me instead, mascara already sliding, and said the only honest thing I ever heard her say to me as an adult. "What did you find?" "Everything," I said. "I found everything." What happened over the following 12 hours happened fast, and then it happened for a very long time. By 11 p.m., half the investors had left the reception, several already on the phone with their own attorneys. Martin Ellis stood by the valet stand shouting into his phone that he wanted every dollar back tonight, which wasn't how any of this worked, but I understood the instinct. By 1 a.m., Ellis's lawyer had filed an emergency motion of his own, joining the SEC's freeze request as an interested party. By 6 a.m., and 2 FBI vehicles were parked outside the Newport estate my parents had rented for the wedding weekend, and Agent Mendez was on the front steps with a federal warrant for financial records stored at the property. My mother answered the door in a silk robe. I wasn't there to see her face, but Teresa Melick was. She'd driven up that morning at my request, unable to stay away, and she told me later that Elaine Vale's expression cracked in a way she'd never seen in 12 years of working for the family. Not tears. Something closer to disbelief that the ending had actually arrived. A financial reporter named Elena Cho, the same reporter Teresa had mentioned at the diner months earlier, broke the story 2 days later under the headline, "Wedding Reception Becomes Ground Zero for $180 million Fraud Collapse." She'd gotten the tip, ironically, from Martin Ellis's own PR team, who wanted to get ahead of the story before it looked like their client had been an easy mark. The asset freeze held. Tom Reyes's forensic mapping meant the $12 million already sent to the Caymans got flagged and frozen within days through an international cooperation request. Money that would otherwise have vanished into a jurisdiction that doesn't answer subpoenas quickly. My father was arrested 3 weeks later on federal wire fraud and securities fraud charges. My mother was charged with conspiracy and obstruction after investigators found she'd personally directed the shredding of foundation records. The weak rumors of an investigation started circulating. Frank Doyle took a plea deal and became a cooperating witness, which meant in the end that even the man who told me to let it go spent his final year at Vail Harbor secretly helping build the case that would end it. Teresa Melick testified for 11 hours over 2 days. Her testimony included the printed email with my father's handwriting in the margin, the one that said I was useful because people already think she's emotional. Patricia had it entered into evidence. It stayed Exhibit D straight through to trial. Vanessa was never criminally charged. She signed a cooperation agreement, forfeited assets traced to fraud-derived gifts, and lost her engagement to Andrew Pierce within 4 months, after his family's attorneys reviewed the case file and decided the risk to their name wasn't worth it. A federal judge appointed a receiver, a court-supervised accountant named Priya Shah, to locate and liquidate whatever Vail Harbor assets remained for investor distribution. She found the Newport estate, 3 vehicles, a wine collection insured for more than most people's houses, and a storage unit in Providence full of art nobody in the family had ever mentioned owning. It took her receivership team almost a year to auction it all, and even then, the recovery covered less than 40 cents on every dollar the SEC's own accounting said had gone missing. The country club my parents had belonged to for 2 decades quietly revoked their membership within a month, mailing the letter to an address they no longer legally controlled. My mother's charity foundation was dissolved by its own board in an emergency vote. 3 other board members, all longtime family friends, released a joint statement distancing themselves so quickly it read like they'd drafted it in advance. Harold Pruitt, for what it's worth, called Patricia's office 2 weeks after the freeze, not to apologize to me directly. We never did speak again, but to ask if there was anything else I should have listened to. I testified in front of a grand jury 8 months after the wedding. I wore the same black dress Vanessa had mocked. I don't know why. Maybe because it was the only thing in my closet that had already survived one Vail family verdict. Denise Marsh sat 2 rows behind me in the hallway outside, the closest thing to a friend the whole ordeal had given me, and squeezed my shoulder before I walked in. "You did the hard part already," she said. "The waiting. This part is just saying it out loud." Inside, an assistant U.S. attorney walked me through Exhibit A to Exhibit M, one by one, in the same flat, careful voice Patricia had used 100 times in prep sessions. When she got to Exhibit D, she read the margin note out loud to the room, and I watched 2 jurors' faces change at the same moment mine had, months earlier, in that diner in Providence. My father was sentenced the following spring to 22 years for wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy. My mother received 11 years for obstruction and conspiracy. The SEC's civil case resulted in a judgment north of $180 million, most of which will never be fully recovered. Patricia was honest with me about that from the beginning. "Justice," she told me once, punishes. It doesn't always repair. At sentencing, I gave a victim impact statement. I didn't call myself the biggest victim in the room. I wasn't. Harold Pruitt sat 2 rows behind me, 81 years old, his retirement gone, there to hear a judge say a number that would never be enough. I looked at the judge and said the only thing I'd rehearsed the night before. My father didn't just take investors' money. He spent 5 years training the people who loved him to doubt their own eyes. I stopped doubting mine. That's the only apology I owe this family. My father didn't look at me when I sat down. He looked at his hands. The SEC whistleblower office later approved an award in my case. I won't say the number. I'll say it was enough to leave Boston, enough to stop checking my bank balance like it might disappear overnight, and not nearly enough to buy back 2 years of birthdays I spent smiling at people I already knew were lying to me. I still think about that toast sometimes. My father's voice, booming with confidence, telling 200 people that the truth always wins. 30 seconds before 30 phones lit up and proved him right in a way he never intended. He didn't know it yet, standing there with his glass raised, but I did. If you made it this far, you already know how these stories are supposed to end, with the villain punished and the quiet one finally believed. Mine actually did. That's the part I still have trouble trusting some mornings. He spent 26 years teaching me which doors were mine to open. It only took one text to open all of them at once.